Well, thank you, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. It's wonderful that you've joined us, and we are very grateful. Today, we have a very special guest, David Utts, who will be telling us all about authentic, courageous leadership. David has had a personal journey from being in sales to coaching, when he identified meditation as a principal way to progress in his spiritual path. He spent half a year in an Indian ashram studying yoga and Eastern philosophy. And since 1996, David has embraced coaching to provide meaning and guidance to business leaders from a practical perspective. He realized he would need to show practical steps to business leaders and business people. And he studied hard and developed his own tools to help people make transition in their lives clearer and tailored to their immediate needs. David knew this would help bring more trust in working with his clients, and it is trust that defines him in the eyes of those who know him. As we are living in a world where trust is a rare commodity, unfortunately, this feature of David defines his character just like no one else. In this edition, David would like to highlight aspects as how to develop more courage to navigate uncertain times, how to overcome fear, learn to be uncomfortable, understand what it means to be authentic. Thank you very much for joining us, David. I will now hand over the stage and the microphone to you. Please, everybody, if you'd like to just give a wave or a round of applause for David Utts.
Hey, thank you very much. Let me get this show up and running here. Well, let me start without the share and just talk to you real quick. I just want to thank really Esther and Dominique for inviting me to present to this esteemed group and to be part of Conscious Enterprise Network. It's their mission. The mission of Conscious Enterprise Network is really important in the world, and the whole conversations we're having here about the development and engagement of conscious leadership is, we all know, we could feel it. We need it in the world big time. So thank you for your contribution, and thank you, Stephen, for being here to facilitate us today. And what I'm going to do today is I'm basically going to just share my story. Going to talk a little bit about my journey. I'm going to then share what I've seen as the three biggest lessons on my spiritual path, because they inform the work that I do. And then I want to talk about, well, what does all those lessons have to do with leadership and leadership development? And I'm going to share some background and research from a mentor that I learned from that was very impactful for me, and it kind of connected my spiritual path to the work that I do. And then I'm going to share a little bit about my leadership work. So that's fundamentally how I'm going to do this today. So just to build off of what Stephen was sharing about my journey, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of some personal highlights in my journey. And one of the things is I can be a difficult character at times, because I have always tended to think outside the box. I had a question ever since I was a kid, and I don't know why I had it, but it just kept on popping up. What is this all adding up to? What is life about? How do you interact and engage with life to experience fulfillment and a sense of contribution? Because of this curiosity, you'll see that I have a whole spiritual journey that I've been on. I also had great fortune of, studying Eastern and Western philosophy, psychology, which was my undergrad work, and then organizational development and leadership development. And as I studied all those, I started seeing connections between all those fields and what they were saying about, as a personal individual, how do we have fulfillment and move forward things we care about in life, but that actually applies to leadership and leadership development. I myself also faced an experience of being human that I'm grateful for now. At the time I wasn't grateful for. I had an addiction and have been still engaging in the recovery process from that addiction. In the midst of addiction, what you realize is there's some part of you that doesn't feel safe in the world, doesn't feel worthy, doesn't feel it has the power it wants to have, and it goes to its medicine to try to feel better. That's really what addiction is. And I think addiction is part of the human experience in general. And I think most human beings have some form of addiction, whether it's a way of thinking or a way of orienting or it's substances. But it's that part of us that doesn't feel quite we're comfortable being here and engaging and as powerful as we like to be. The other side of recovery is, what are you recovering? You're recovering that part of yourself that does feel confident, safe, empowered to be here. And I was also blessed with unending resilience and determination. I can't say where that came from, but something in me kept on, churning the butter till it turned to cream. Turned to butter, if you will. I kept going. So I'm grateful for that resiliency that was given to me for some reason. My spiritual journey highlights it. I started meditating back in 1982. I met a friend who took me to a meditation center, and I learned how to meditate, and I've never looked back. Something occurred for me in the meditation process that connected me to something more resilient and deeper inside of myself. And I was interested in knowing that more and continued. That led me actually just a year later to go on sabbatical to India. I left my sales job at the time, went to Ganeshpuri, India, which is right outside of, at that time was Bombay, now it's Mumbai, and lived there for 6 months, and also included an opportunity to travel around India. And there was something about that country, if anybody's visited, you just feel it when you're there. It comes out of the ground, it's everywhere, and it's one of the birthplaces of so much spirituality that has blessed us in our lives. I also was in a process of really engaging self-help a lot during the journey, as a lot of us have throughout our process of our lives. And I say that because what happened for me in 2014 was very surprising. I had an experience where one day, I don't know what happened, but I was able to see through every belief I had and realize that they meant nothing in a certain way. That I had lived my life on a foundation of ways of orienting and perceiving the world and seeing myself in that world that was a mixed bag. But I got to see, for whatever reason, I got to see through that there was something more to life than what I believed. And I went deeply into a place where I experienced my heart in a very profound way. And what that led me to is even a recognition of the way that I had done the spiritual path. That somehow I had realized I was doing the spiritual path. If I felt I meditated enough, I chanted enough, I did enough selfless service, if I worked on my self-help self and tried to become a better person, that somehow someday some crack would happen and I would become enlightened, that it would just happen. And I'm sure that happens that way for some people. In my experience, what I recognized in a certain way was the unhelpful nature of self-help. That in a certain way, the self-help had reinforced my ego structure in a way that was still having me hide from life in certain ways. And so it was a great recognition, and it led me to really non-duality, the philosophy of non-duality, which basically says there's only one thing that exists. You are that thing. And I became very interested in understanding, how do you understand and experience you are that one thing? And I'll share a little bit about those lessons about my spiritual journey. And finally, just my work, just a high level, as Stephen noticed, I started in sales for 15 years. That led me to moving from one organization to another organization. And my curious, operations research mind was operating, and I started saying, when I go to one company, I feel when I walk in the door, I can relax. I'm supported. I'm empowered. Nobody's looking over my shoulder. And why in other organizations where it felt differently? And I became very interested in, how organizations work, how leadership operated, and that led me to go back and get my master's in organizational development in 1994. I graduated, and following that I got 2 coaching certifications from 2 different schools of coaching, and I became an avid student of leadership. And over the last 24 years I've been serving hundreds of executives as an executive coach. So all that really bleeds into, okay, what did I take away from all that? And when Esther and Dominic said, we really want you to get to the core of what it is that you learned, I really appreciated that push from them. And so I really did some reflection about it. And these are really the 3 biggest lessons that I learned from this life journey that I was on. Number 1 is, what's the truth about enlightenment? We all, if you look at this picture of this individual, this is all what we want. The bliss, the oneness, the experience of unity, the sense of being connected to life and enjoying it. And quite frankly, the reason why most of us, and I certainly, for me, why I continued on the spiritual path, is I had moments of experiencing this within my meditation and being in, on retreats and in life. And it was kind of the tease that kept me going. That there was I knew that experience was available to me. But that experience that I had in 2014 made me realize that I was putting the cart before the horse. That fundamentally, the spiritual journey is a deconstruction project. That because in a sense, what I recognized, we couldn't experience those moments of enlightenment unless it was already there inside us, waiting to be discovered and experienced. So it's not something we have to chase after. I was a seeker for 30 some years, and I realized I'd rather be a finder than a seeker, right? So the finding project was really a deconstruction project where I had to go inside myself and look at my childhood trauma and bring it up and look at it and be with it. In a sense, see through it. There was conditioning from social conditioning and the conditioning I had growing up as a child, etc., that caused me to believe certain things. And I never asked for those beliefs. They were just implanted in me from my environment. Shadow work, going into the parts of myself that I didn't like very much, that was really a cause for a lot of my unworthiness because I was ashamed of it. And going in and looking at that and realizing, well, it's both and. Everything about me is to be loved, right? It's to be appreciated. Not easy work, but it's necessary. And I had some inner demons that I had to look at, right? And these are all the things that needed to be looked at, because what I recognize is I believe we have a world of enlightened people already, 100%. The problem is it's much like a cloudy day, right? We look up at the clouds. Where's the sun? Well, the sun's still there. It's just the clouds are blocking it. And I think that's a great metaphor for the enlightenment process, that we're already fully free. It's just that the clouds that are blocking us, we have to explore and inquire into and be with and acknowledge and honor in a certain way, that they're there for a reason. And so the ultimate means for enlightenment in my needs is learning to radically accept life as it is and embrace it and surrender to life. As I have gone into my process, what's happened is there's been this ungluing that I began to start seeing, this loosening of the ego structure that begins to soften, and kind of I get space from it. Doesn't cause me as many problems as I do this second lesson that I learned, which is really lesson 2 is awareness is the doorway to the heart and the greatest conduit for healing. And all the self-help work that I did, all the spiritual practices that I learned, while they can be very valuable, I was more a collector of practices and knowledge and understanding than I was a applier of those things. And what I recognize that it comes down to something very simple. We just have to turn our attention back towards ourselves and learn how to be with that which we truly are, which is already there in our awareness. And by sitting and resting in that awareness, it's a doorway to the heart. That unless we really get to know ourselves at that level of being with awareness and understanding what that is and who we are and who we're not, we block ourselves from that sunlight. And once we start embracing that, we drop into the heart. And also, awareness itself was a healer for me. It's the greatest healer I've ever been to. That at certain points, I would be with these challenges that let's say I was facing something around my own unworthiness, and being with it, I would notice that there were moments when things would just start dissolving. And all of a sudden I said, I used to have that problem and now it's gone. So it's those kinds of things. And Rumi has a great quote that I love that really points to this, is that what you are looking for is what you're looking through. So what I tended to do is leak my awareness out into things, which is fine, like in my work and into relationships and into trying to, do this next self-help workshop or meditation or whatever. But it was turning that attention back towards myself. That's where I started actually making progress on my path. So that's why I say that. The third area, which is love is the great unifier and the primary force of creation. I mean, this is an easy one. I think we all can recognize the value of love, but that was also the thing that kept me going, because I would have these moments of experiencing self-love or experiencing love for others and realize that this power was in me. I also, through my research and studies, recognize that as our connection to love deepens, so does our presence, our ability to be present with life, our inspiration and creativity. I mean, love is the mother of all creation, right? It's a connectivity to ourselves and each other that happens through it. And so the question is, what does all this have to do with leadership? The whole idea that the enlightenment is a deconstructive process. Is it the same for enlightened leadership? That awareness is the primary source through which we gain a deeper power from ourselves. And third, that love is the unifier. And what allows for things to be created and move forward in the world. Now, I learned from one of my greatest mentors that I was able to spend a lot of time with Bob Anderson back in the early 2000s, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences in understanding leadership that I ever had. Bob has a couple of great books out. One I would recommend if you're an avid student of leadership is his and Bill Adams' book on mastering leadership, which goes into some of the research I'm about to share and helped and really illuminated to me, connected me back to my spirituality and how it applies to developing leadership. So this slide is a terrible slide from a slide presentation perspective, but I show this for effect. So don't expect you to read all this. I'm going to point you to a couple of things, but I want to just to set that context. So one of the things Bob did is he looked at all the leadership competency models that are out there. And basically what a leadership competency model is, if that term is new to you, is simply a researcher who looks out at great leaders like a Nelson Mandela and a Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, Oprah Winfrey, people like that clearly expressed leadership, and said, what are the behaviors and competencies they engage as leaders that demonstrates that leadership? And then they study all these leaders in different ways, and they come up with a model that marks out competencies. And the idea behind that is that we can understand the competencies, we can train people in leadership competencies. That's the idea behind the models. So Bob studied all those. He also did a lot of other research, and I'm just putting it up there. These are the things that he studied and integrated into his leadership development framework and system. And I'm not going to read all those off, and I want to point to one of them, which is the stages of adult development frameworks that he studied from Coburg and Keegan and Wilbur and others. And what Bob basically understood is that what he said is leadership equates to a particular level of adult development. So, the way we can look at this is childhood development, right? Children develop, as we know, in very predictable ways. Like for myself, I'm from my Christian background, and when Christmas came and I was 6-7 years old, I believed that Santa could go all around the world, deliver all the presents to all the children, and get home into morning in time for breakfast with Mrs. Claus. And so that was the time when magical thinking was all a part, and we all loved children in that stage. We almost want to share in the glow of it, right? It's a beautiful thing and very fun. But then what happens is, sooner or later, you realize the jig's up, that wasn't necessarily true, and that you become more interested in how the world works. And we call it maybe the Guinness Book of World Records phase, where the child begins to become interested in how things work in the world and how they're measured and, those kinds of things. And it's a natural progress of the brain and the nervous system as it develops. Well, basically, adults also continue to develop, although less predictably. And there are stages of adult development that have been studied by Keegan and others. This is Bob Anderson's way of framing it, that these are stages of adult development from egocentric to reactive to creative to what many call integral, which is really the state of oneness that you can go into at high states of consciousness, to the unitive, whereas you fully drop into your heart and unify with life. So these are the stages that, that at least the way they're articulated by Bob, that adults can go through, but it's not predictable, right? But when he was studying this, what he noticed is, when he looked at leaders that had not developed leadership yet, the competencies at the reactive, their competencies were very aligned with the reactive stage of adult development. What he also noticed is that those that had, people would say on their 360s, clearly a leader, showing up as a leader, they were demonstrating the competencies of the creative stage of adult development. So fundamentally what Bob realized is the evolution into leadership is a rise of consciousness in the human being. So that it's a rise in awareness and a rise in consciousness. And when that rise happens, going back to the competency models, the leadership competencies boot up on the new operating system as leadership. So all of a sudden, instead of worrying about me all the time, I'm thinking about we and how we can do it together. I'm more interested in making sure we're visionary and we're more strategic than tactical or solving problems. I'm more interested in being collaborative with others, etc. And this naturally begins to occur in the human being as their consciousness raises to the creative level. So let me just talk about these phases really quickly, just to give you a sense of them and see if you can relate to them. So if you go to the reactive stage, this basically what reactive stage is that we have a sense of increasing anxiety. And I use a term like, if I'm feeling like I look in the mirror and my belly's a little too big, I get this anxiety, like, what is that going to mean for me? So all of a sudden I decide I'm going to do something about this, and I start eating celery every day and going to the gym and so forth. And that leads to action, right? But what happens is, once I look at the mirror again and my stomach's I'm looking pretty good, I'm back to sitting on the couch and eating Reese's peanut butter cups. It's like, what happens is in a sense the execution wanes as anxiety drops, so you get inconsistent outcomes. And so the fundamental qualities of this reactive stage, is the focus is on fixing problems and firefighting. So we see executives running around all the time like their hair's on fire in organizations these days, because they're also going around focusing on this problem and that problem, and they're letting anxiety kind of drive their behaviors at a fundamental level. In many ways, very effectively. It may not look like anxiety, but it's being driven from that place. The driving energy is the desire to reduce anxiety. So that's the unconscious drive, is to reduce that anxiety. And the core driver is more me focused, right? It's focused on, I want to win or achieve, or I want to be right, or I want to be liked. So those three primary strategies that at this reactive stage operate. For me, a lot of it was about to be liked. I wanted to be liked, and I did whatever I could do so that people would like me. At some level, that was driving a lot of my behaviors. That's what drove me into sales, because if I did a really good job for my customers, they would like me, and I was driven by it. In the beginning of my leadership practice, it was, if I could work with leaders at this senior level and they like me, I'm okay. So it's interesting how those things kind of operate and drive us in our lives. And so the goal is to try to move people to a creative stage, which is more the leadership stage. And this one, vision, passion, desire, and love are the driver of heart-centered, fearless action. So I see something in the world that's a gap. Maybe there's the homeless population bothers me, and I want to do something about it. And I care about people, and I go to do it because I care, and I want to make a difference there. And that leads me to taking action that's from my heart. And as I do that, and I feel this progress in that process, it emboldens me and sends me and directs me to further action, which generates sustainable results. And that's what leaders do. They generate sustainable results. So the qualities of this outcome creative orientation are that the focus is on outcome, vision, purpose. It's purpose driven. It's a natural thing when you're in the creative stage to be oriented towards purpose more than you would have been before. The driving energy is love, passion, and inspiration. What opens my heart? What inspires me? Where do I feel called to my compassion? And that's what drives my energy forward. And then the core driver is we focus to make things better together. So I'm much more interested, as I see leaders that I work with, they become keenly interested in developing others because they love to see others shine and be empowered. There's something that motivates them to that, because then they can collectively work with them to make something bigger happen. So that's fundamentally, as we know, we're fundamentally facing a crisis in leadership right now. And what I would, pointing back to what I just said in Bob Anderson's work, we're fundamentally dealing with leaders and executives out there. They're in a reactive state. And when you think about what's going on in the world, that should make us worry, because people are reacting to wanting to reduce their anxiety by however they're relating to the situation that they're in. That's fundamental. We don't necessarily, if you look in, and this is my opinion, world leaders, corporate leaders, and we have a world that's increasingly uncertain. So the ground is moving underneath our feet, and we're in survival orientation. We're in a survival state. And that survival state, people don't realize they're already fully okay. They're amazing. Their hearts have the ability to lead. They have everything they need. And so the idea is to try to, my mission basically in my work is to help move people. Oops, sorry about that. Exist to create, encourage the processes, principles, practices, and resources that predictably and rapidly expand enlightened leadership in the world. And I emphasize predictably and rapidly because I realized we can't go by old ways of developing leadership. Fundamentally, the way we've developed leadership for the most part in organizations has been doing that reverse engineering thing with competency models and then going in and creating trainings and ways of orienting leaders to act and behave. And we haven't we haven't encouraged them to ignite that creative orientation, which happens inside them. Because ultimately, I say relationship is first of all a state of being that leads to a different kind of doing. We tend to look at the external expression of leadership, but the external expression of leadership is directed by an internal state of being that we have to honor and help the executive ignite within themselves so this other part of themselves can come forward. So that's how I look at leadership, is that enlightened leaders are inherently creative, authentic, and courageous. That the authenticity and the courage comes when we go into ourselves and begin to challenge. What stories am I telling about myself, about who I am and who I'm leading, what I'm trying to create? Are those stories and that way of orienting supporting me and leaning in a certain way? What do I want to create? And it's very interesting when you would be surprised, very senior executives that I ask that question to initially can be baffled by that question. What is it that I want to create? What is it I want to create around me? What is it that I want to have impact on? They're traditionally very good in their business and very good in their expertise, and that's really, really important for what they do, but they have not brought themselves into the process of being something that could actually create massive transformation around them. And once you begin to ignite that purpose, not from an intellectual place, but from a heart space, from a feeling space, something different happens to the leader, and they begin to bring themselves forward and automatically begin to become more emotionally intelligent, sensitive to engaging how they engage others, because they recognize the importance of it rather than being told the importance of it, right, through a training program. And I say that such leaders generate an environment that brings out the best in others, leading to high performance and profound outcomes in service to a great mission. Leaders have to first generate that environment within themselves. So that's the first step. What is it within you that would have you bring your best self forward? What blocks you from doing that? Let's look at those stories and maybe deconstruct those stories and help you build a greater relationship with awareness so that you start being sensitive to the subtleties of the story you're telling yourself and the things you're telling yourself they're getting in your way, and begin to help you engage what you care about, and how to take care of yourself. Leaders are terrible at self-care. How do you take care of yourself so that you can be in a place to serve? So all of this has led me to, and this is the last slide before we have an opportunity to talk, it led me to the development of my authentic, courageous leadership system. And I just want to talk a little bit about what this means. As you see, the center point of my model is expanding executive presence. Now, that's a fancy word for building a relationship with awareness, and to begin to do some self-inquiry around what is it in you that you care about and what's blocking you from expressing that more fully. That moves out to in the model to the area of focus, the area of focus, which relates to the executive presence at the same time. That what do I want to focus on? So I work with leaders to help them get clear about what their personal purpose is, why they show up in life, what they care about. I help them understand who do they want to be as a leader, and that who they want to be as a leader is both, I want to express that now, but it also presents them with a developmental path. Because most people that say, I want to be an empowering, decisive, confident, and contributory leader, well, how are you doing those things now? On a scale from 1 to 10, I'm about a 4 on a scale from 1 to 10. So how do we get that to a 6 and 7? What do you have to do within yourself to lean into that? And that goes back to the deconstructive / building of awareness process that I talked about in my own personal journey. So once they're working with that fundamental executive presence, which touches all the other competencies, they begin to focus on what they want to create. Well, then they have to realize they have to do it with others. They have to collaborate. They have to build high value relationships with others and begin to explore how to build alignment and maintain alignment to move forward what they care about, to generate commitments, generate a vision and a set of commitments and priorities that is going to move that forward. And then the goal is that's being reinforced by a more creative orientation. The inspiration, what I care about is generating energy forward to perform what maybe before they did this, before they recognized this, they may have been a little not as bold. But now all of a sudden they find themselves being more bold in their actions with their teams to generate an outcome that's really meaningful to them and their organization. And then, of course, innovation is key, which is really just stepping back from time to time and giving ourselves feedback, going back to the vision and comparing what we've done. How are we doing? What are we doing well that we want to keep doing? What are we doing that we should not do anymore? And this is an important area of reflection that many times business leaders don't necessarily do with their teams, which is to step back after a project's done and celebrate the success and look at how we can improve. They tend to let projects fizzle out and they move into the next project without taking advantage of that really important time post-project to really learn how to do it better. And that takes them back to their focus. Okay, let's revisit our vision. What's next? Where are we going to take things? And of course, all along the way is constantly attending to their executive presence. So that's fundamentally my journey. It started with me personally just asking, what the heck is this life all about? And it was one of those questions that just stuck in my craw and led me to my spiritual path, led me to my studies, led me to really becoming interested in leadership and organizational development, and then led me to those 3 lessons that I learned. And then Bob Anderson pulled it all together for me. It wasn't teaching people new tricks or new behaviors. It was about igniting something within them that would naturally lead them to having an impact. So there you have it. I see we already have a hand up. Is there
first of all, David, I'd like to thank you so much for the talk and for sharing with us your journey and your lessons and your methodology at the end, which is great. I've got a pile of questions. I'm not going to ask them all because it would be too much, but I do have a couple, and I see Anatoly's got his hand up. So I will come to you in a moment, Anatoly. But first of all, I wanted to just come back on a couple of points from the talk. One of them that really stuck out to me, and I think we're all aware of this, is our current leadership crisis that's going on today. And why do you think it is that we are going down this road where most of our big countries, most of our big companies, most of our leaders, the leaders of leaders, if you like, are in crisis, and we're getting such bad choices and such people who are maybe a little bit polarized or whatever? Why do you think this is what's happening at the moment?
It's not easy, right? It's a simple answer, not easy, but it's fundamentally, I think we tend to think we are our personality and what people think about us, right? And that leads a lot of why, and we rarely do question our principles and our philosophies, and we lose track of doing the highest and best for things, and we end up doing things for ourselves. I mean, people are ultimately locked into ego, and to me, that's an oversimplistic answer. But when you're in there, you go back to, we're trying to win, trying to be liked, trying to be right. Those are fundamental principles that 98% of the world's population is still struggling with to move forward. Then you get somebody that gets into power, and it's one of the most intoxicating things. In fact, I would think that for myself, if I got into power before I gained a certain degree of self-awareness, I would have probably fallen in the same trap they do. You got money and power, and you realize that everybody around you is hungry for money and power, and who's going to get the most money and power, and that becomes the game we play. That's my response to that. No, yeah.
I hear you, and the word ego popped up, and I believe that's a lot of it. That there's exactly as you say, that they're looking after the me because they feel threatened, maybe, and not about the we. Because they just feel that they can lead the we wherever they want.
And quite frankly, most of us never been shown who we really are or taught who we really are. And so we form our personality and believe that's who we are, and then we try to protect it. That's what it comes down to. So it's not like people should get over it and get over their ego. We don't like that, but they have to have their own awakening. That's why it's so my mission. Why I'm so passionate about my mission, because we have to do that quickly right now.
Fantastic. And as I say, I've got a lot of questions, but I'm not going to focus on me. I'm going to focus on the we. If you have a question, Anatoly.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. David, thanks for a great presentation. That was really fun. I mean, I have a question which is very simple. Trying to take you back across your lifespan journey and stuff. You're singling out 3 major stages from deconstruction, awareness, and ultimately love. So do you have any idea about the time in between? How much time goes in to, go from one stage to another? Thank you.
I think that's a great question. For me, my own experience has been that really the second lesson leads to the other two. It's recognizing we are not the person we think we are, and being willing. For me, this is my experience. When I was willing to stop trying to be that, or not try to be that. If I stopped, when I stopped worrying about making that better or improving that, and began to be more curious about who I am, and I turned my attention inward, and we hear that all the time. Turn your attention inward. What do you turn your attention inward to? You turn your attention into the one that's looking out. Holding this, when I held my attention on that, turned my attention inward, and on that just experience of being aware, that's when I started seeing breakthroughs. So that's what, if you're gonna, that would save me time. If I knew that 30 years ago, I would have saved myself 30 years of grief and suffering. That would have led me to where I'm at today. But of course, I'm not like berating myself for the time I went through, because I learned a lot. But that to me is the thing. And the thing is, for me, it's so simple. And the mind doesn't like simple. So my mind would fight that simplicity. But that simplicity is the only thing I had to do. And when I started doing that, that's when I started having a breakthrough myself. So, and I've heard from others that that's similar for them as well when they get that understanding.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the question, Anatoly. Great question and a great answer. Our next question will come from Joel Hodroff.
Great, David, thanks. I have the privilege of being personal friends with you as well as colleagues. And I know you're a big movie fan. Movies bring to the pop culture a lot of growing and contemporary wisdom, like Star Wars brought us the Force as a new way of thinking about spirit, and Avatar brought us holistic sensibilities, nature and the oneness, and the role of non-human allies. So anyway, anything about either movie lessons or maybe more importantly, healthy, balanced lifestyles to be the change we want to see in the world. But then you and I are always going around and around on the personal versus the systemic, and anything, that you can share into the group about the both and nature of, we're in milieus that really people are so satisfied working on themselves, and yet there's systemic roots to so many of the problems we face. Can you really be the collective product of lots of people working on themselves, or are there some systemic roots to the problems we're trying to tackle?
Yeah, great. Well, first of all, I'll say my favorite movie of all time for me is Matrix. So to me, that's a demonstration of what I was speaking about today in a very specific way, that we think we're in this reality, and then we wake up to realizing that what we thought we were was not at all who we are. And, to me, that movie really sums it up, what I've talked about today. Yeah, to me, again, we won't see change happen unless it's systemic change. I mean, we won't see lasting change happen unless it's systemic change. The question for me is, who is going to lead that change? And who's going to realize the importance of leading that change? So as I say, leadership, the development process of leadership is waking up a state of being that would orient to that unbridled passion and care and depth of desire to improve the experience for other human beings on the planet, that leads into heart-centered, fearless action that leads to those systemic changes. It's both and we can't, as you say, stop and wait and freeze and wait for all the leaders to develop for that change to happen. At the same time, it's really good to have enlightened leaders leading that systemic change, or we get more of the same. And you look at some of the things you speak about, like the changes from kings and queens to democracy and things like that. That happened because enlightened people were leading those changes. A few handful of people that made a difference. So that's what I would say to that. Yeah.
Thank you once again for the question, Joel, and thank you, David, for the answer. And I'm going to hand over now to Alan. I believe you've got a question, Alan.
Sure. David, first off, I really loved how you broke down the degrees of leadership, and I found it, especially with Stephen's question earlier on, of how that all really paints an interesting picture of our leadership in the world today, our world leaders, how they all, with their egos and everything, kind of got stuck in this reactionary area of your degrees of leadership. And interestingly enough, y'all vibrate differently at those different levels also. So
absolutely.
they're attracting everything at that level to them. So it's interesting how our global leadership is just vibrating at this lower level and attracting all the junk to them. So
Well said.
anyway, just a side thing. I really thought it was very interesting. But my question is a simple one. So what is the book on leadership that has had the greatest impact for you?
Well, Mastery to Leadership is that book only points to the time I spent with Bob Anderson, so I highly recommend that one. Another one is Language and the Art of Leadership Excellence, which really points to understanding the ontology of language and how it gets engaged with leadership, with leaders, and those are two books that I'll put them in down in the comments section just to make sure people get the books. But yeah.
Yeah, those are the two that you had listed up there. Yeah, those look like really good books. So it's definitely something that are foundational to what's happening, and just igniting that conscious ability and bringing it all together. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks for that question,
Yeah,
Alan.
thank
And thanks, David, for offering to add that to the comments, because that will be useful, I think, for everybody. The next question is coming from Esther. So if Esther would like to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I really enjoy your presentation, David. And you mentioned that you were practicing yoga quite a long time ago, since a long time ago now, and meditation. You told us about your experience in India. So I was just wondering, in which ways has these practices sharpened your perception as a leader? And also, what is your daily practice, if you want to share that with us?
Yeah, very good question. Well, the journey of learning meditation has been a really rich and enjoyable one for me. And as I said, it opened me to realizing the inner world is much more vast than the outer world, and contained within us is all the solutions we need. And and that I started to recognize this when I would be coaching leaders, and the way it practically applies as something sometimes in a coaching session will come out of my mouth and I have no idea where I learned it from, but it was perfect for what had to be said in the session. So I've learned to trust myself more. Trust my instincts. They're not my personal instincts. I'm connecting to greater instincts and greater solutions that are ready to be shared with me if I just open the door. And it goes back to me being able to being such a tough customer and so resistant to letting go. I remember, as I meditated more and more, what I noticed is there would be these moments when I finally let go of something, and I said, why was it so hard for me to let go of that? But all of a sudden it's no longer there anymore. And I can only point to my relationship with meditation as what led to that release. That's why I say awareness is the greatest healer, because I didn't go somewhere to a Reiki healer or somebody like that, or an energy healer. It just happened within me through bringing my attention in. And so that's what I would share about that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a great question. And I also hear you that this whole thing of being aware, it's the very first step to dealing with anything. If we're not aware of a situation, we can't deal with it. So absolutely, awareness is the starting point for everything, I think. Ashok, I saw that you had a question in the comments. Is that the question that you're going to bring to us now? You just need to unmute yourself and please go ahead.
Thank you, Stephen. David, I must compliment you. I mean, it was a very new kind of a perspective on the concept of leadership. The regularity with which we keep on experiencing or hearing about corporate scandals. We have a lot of scandals like Dieselgate and whatever.
Yeah.
So I suspect that when you say that there is a crisis in leadership today, it has to do with the absence of values amongst leaders. Now, education is not the right tool to impart values to people. It could possibly lead them the other way around, towards more materialistic goals. So how does one groom leaders into aspiring for higher values in their day-to-day conduct of business?
That is a great question. I really appreciate it, Ashok. In my experience of working with leaders, most times they're not fully in touch with their values. I think part of this is I'm not saying that not all leaders aren't, but a lot of the leaders I run into, they're clear that they want to be ethical and they want to do the right thing, but they're not necessarily, as you say, always clear on their values. And one of the processes that I guide all my leaders through is a values clarification process. I think there's, understanding what I really care more deeply about and touching into that. It has to be, people have to be able to understand how to get to access to those values and be reminded of them. The other thing is, as going back to, as Esther's question, as leaders experience and rise in their awareness, they tend to get more connected to their hearts and that's where their values lie. One of the teachers that I've studied in non-duality, Ramana Maharshi, had a phrase that all good qualities arise in the enlightened one. So what happens is we start waking up to our silliness, how we cause suffering in ourselves and the suffering in other people. And when that happens, that tends to have us operate differently and recognizing how important it is to operate differently. And I think, unfortunately, in organizations, we've also compelled people to act towards the unethical because we're so emphatic about profit as being a driver of business, that when that emphasis on profit is so, and that is not the purpose of business. The corporate bylaws would say it's the purpose of business, but the purpose of business is to create value in the world, is what I say. And if you create enough value, you'll be profitable, right? We kind of know that makes sense. But when you're driving to be efficient and profitable as a primary emphasis, it's going to start having you cross lines, especially if you have not developed enough self-awareness or enough connection to your values, because that's where you're getting strokes. That's where you're getting reinforcement. That's where you're saying, good job, John. Great job, And so as we get that reinforcement, it's almost like organizations are taking advantage of people's traumas to get them to have more profit, but then they start stepping over lines. And it's unfortunate. You see it everywhere, as you say. It's a challenge we have to come up with, but it is somewhat through education, but it's also having people understand where to find those values.
Yeah, thank you. I totally see that. Thank you, Ashram, for the question and David for the answer. And values are so important. And it's really great to look into our values, our core values, and get a proper understanding of them if we want to be a better leader. Arthur, you have your hand up. And I'm actually, in the interest of time, I believe that we might not have time for any more than one more question, but let's see how it goes. And then we'll see if we can squeeze one more in after that.
Yeah, and some of this you may have already answered for me. David, I just want to set, I guess, in counter to your favorite movie of Matrix, which I haven't, by the way. I'm going to put that on my list. But Wall Street was definitely is at the top of my list of great movies. Because I think it's very reflective of a stage in our society, which we are seeing the active results in many ways of corporations trying to scurry about to adapt to the new changing world. But my question to you is, you mentioned systemic need for development. Have you developed a thesis on how to move that personal change concept that you're working on into a systemic application where, for example, in business, how would that work in a day-to-day business operation?
Yeah, well, I'll answer this. I would have in a very quick time, but I think that there is helping people guide them through the processes that relate the leadership model to their business needs. So I do a strong job of connecting the two and enrolling the executive in doing things that they should do to grow that self-awareness and those practices. I also work with partners like Anatoly, who have different means to do that much more in a very quick way. And as I say, we have to do that quickly and find that's why I'm looking for partnerships and connections with people that can help do that very effectively and very quickly. That's not doing justice to your answering your fully given the time restraints, but that would be the shorter answer.
Dominic, do you want to just quickly come in with your question?
Okay, so in a world of crisis where we are today, we need a new form of leadership. And in many ways, this is why Chen is here. When we created Conscious Enterprises Network, it was really to assemble the potential leaders to actually make that change possible. So David, I know you're a member of our community, but from your perspective, what do you see for the future? Do you see that we are on the right track? And if we are not, what should we be doing to put us back on the right track?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say that I have great faith that somehow life is orchestrating some of these things so more people wake up. We need people to wake up. The big question is, how do you wake up a mass of people to the capacity that they have within themselves to solve the problems that we have? So what I do is I do my small part in working with my clients and trying to find ways to help other leaders that are ready to do that and do it in various means. I think, conscious, enterprise network doing its thing and getting the word out and showing there's a different way of approaching the way that we solve problems through conscious leadership is a thing. That's a question that I have. How do we do this more quickly? And I think having a community like this to get together and have heart to hearts about it is an important step. So Chen provides that community, and we need more of those communities to give birth, and open up the dialogue about this and have a place for leaders to have real conversations about what's really going on and get them to talk about what their challenges are and to grow. So that's the best answer I have. It's a big one that we all have to answer together.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the question, Dominic. And thank you, everybody, for coming along. I'm going to close up nice and quickly because we've actually overrun by a few minutes, but I think it was worth it. There was so much value this evening in the talk, in the questions, in the answers. And I really thank everybody for your contribution, for joining us, for adding your energy to this amazing event. To Chen, to Esther and Dominic for setting all of this up and getting this conversation going, because it's only by dialogue that we can really create great result. I'm a firm believer in that. So I do thank you all for taking part. I thank you, David, for your wisdom, for sharing that with us and everything that we've learned today. I think if anyone has further questions, David has put his details up there so you can get directly in contact with David. I would look him up and send questions and engage with him, engage with everybody else here. Let's collaborate together. Let's build this Chen movement and every other, as David said, the other movements that are around. Let's unite them all, because it's only through dialogue and through coming together that we can really solve the issues that we're facing today. And as we all know, there are a lot of issues we're facing, but they are resolvable. We just have to take the right tracks. So thank you all very much. I'm going to sign off myself now, and we will see you all in a month.